Hey, do you want to come over and make a pot of tea, bring your favorite crystals? We could talk about our birth charts, spirits, the latest house spells we've been doing. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm that witch next door. All right, folks, here it is. This is the third and final part of the Pluto Through the Generations mini-series that I did with my friend and teammate, JennySRP. I hope you can tell how much this conversation meant to me and why I wanted so badly to explore this topic and share it with all of you. And I'm so grateful to hear the different connections that you are all making and that you're finding this to be just as fascinating and profound as we did. So I just want to thank you for coming on this really amazing Plutonian journey with Jenny and I. We are so incredibly grateful. Please bear in mind, if you love what you're hearing and you would like to book an astrology reading with Jenny or with myself, of course, the information to do so is in the show notes below. And again, as always, if you have any thoughts or questions or connections that you make that you would like to share, please don't ever hesitate to reach out and share those with me. I love keeping the conversation going with you beyond our episode. And without further ado, here is the third and final part of Pluto Through the Generations. So, Pluto in Scorpio, the millennial generation, I think that some of the biggest changes and shifts that we see, really, a lot of it is attributed to what we're talking about, Jenny, this idea of the sanctity of childhood coming into play and being something that parents, in a lot of ways, for the first time, prioritizing, protecting, and prioritizing them just having. I think that the parents that raised millennials had some of the earliest instincts of, I want to get a chance to be a parent. I want to get a chance to have a relationship with my child, an emotional relationship with my child. And this is relatively new for us in modern history. This is a relatively new concept. And when I was reading through some of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's this really fascinating article called 75 Years of Change of the American Family. The article itself was written in 1990, so right inside that millennial generation. And it was going back and recounting since 1915. And this whole article is just very, if you've ever read a statistics article, it's, just a lot of numbers and stuff. But the visuals and the graphics and the charts that they're able to create from the data is really, really, really fascinating, where we're seeing children being born and families being created for a utilization purpose. And in a lot of ways for a survival purpose. And for the first time, and you can see it in these statistics, and this article's in the show notes for anybody that's interested, you can see the emotional, and this is perfect for Pluto and Scorpio, you can see the need for the emotion, the emotional needs of a family and that emotional desire to have a family. But also very interesting during this time is divorce rates have skyrocketed by this point in time. And by 1990, And I think this is still about the same, by the way. I think the divorce rate is still about the same. The divorce rate by 1990 has reached almost one divorce for every two marriages. But the average age at first marriage, like we had talked about, is increasing for both men and women, and later aged first marriages are having lower divorce rates. But from the beginning to the end of the 20th century, we see the act of marriage go from mainly a financial or even legal obligation to one ideally of love and attraction based on personal interest. And isn't this so that intimacy of Scorpio?
Yeah, and that comes with the empowerment of women to be people and sovereign in their own wants and desires and choices, which, even though the suffragettes and the women's rights movements were early on in these Pluto through the signs, it takes a long time for that to catch up culturally. And even still to this day, obviously, we're still discovering the war of the sexes, if you will, the gender divide, what gender is, which we'll probably get into more in the next sign, and being empowered as a human individual. And once women had more of a power to do that, and with the gay rights movement, gay people, men or women, had more of a right to choose the person that they loved without being forced into a heterosexual marriage for those reasons that you said, for protection, really, on a financial and social level. This is starting to really come to fruition in that Pluto and Scorpio. Yeah.
And Scorpio, since we're obviously getting ready to transition into the next generation from Scorpio into Sagittarius, wouldn't you say Scorpio definitely experiences those extremes and that polarizing energy much, much more than Sagittarius will? And this is why I think throughout the millennial generation, while we were young children, babies or teens, right? I think that that's why we still witnessed the adults at that time experiencing. I remember growing up with that strong battle of the sexes. That was so prevalent in my childhood. And I know that had been very common for the generations that came before me, and the different phrasings and little euphemisms that would be used very, very casually back then. And it's really not until Pluto and Sagittarius that we start to see the breaking down of that divide. It's not completely gone, I agree with you, but for the first time we have seen like this really, really big, it's very connected to like when the Berlin Wall came down. Like we're seeing these people attempting to dismantle this wall of divide and trying to have this both and mentality and approach versus either or. So with that, will you, Jenny, please introduce us to the next generation, Pluto and Sagittarius?
Yeah, and I'd say that Pluto and Scorpio being a fixed sign, I think Pluto through all the fixed signs has almost more of a difficult or explosive effect because the fixed sign is so much hard. It takes so much more force to change it. Whereas you move into a mutable sign like Sagittarius, there is some more lending of the ability for things to change and to be fluid, even though, the elements will change. There's more fluidity, especially in these mutable signs. Where the transformations can come about in different ways. But yeah, in Pluto and Sagittarius, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. We end up also getting this very expansive and very romantic era once again, but it's also full of big events. In the media landscape, we have an arrangement of Y2K, Armageddon, disaster, and apocalyptic movies. And this happens a lot with Jupiter in Gemini too. So we may see this coming up in our Jupiter and Gemini season, that there's these themes of apocalypse or ends of the world conversations that come up because it's an expansion of ideas. It's an overinflation of these threads that we can see play out, and where we think of disaster movies basically in our heads and on the screens. And then we get our mega fantasy series. It's like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars prequel. So these mega franchises of gigantic fantasy films, which is just so Sagittarius. It's huge,
Yes.
and it's fantastical. We got the release of the Human Genome Project to the public, which is the complete set of human genetic information. And this begins our scientific revolution of being able to understand what makes us human on a genetic level, which is fascinating. We also, on the violent side of things, we got the generation of school shootings, 9/11 in 2001, the War on Terror, and idealism warfare, where these ideas of fighting and sacrificing yourself for your religious ideals or societal ideals, in the case of maybe some school shootings, or for fame, even another Sagittarian fire sign theme were unfortunately prevalent. And yes, Scorpio and Sagittarius kids growing up, Pluto generations, are aware of these like ongoing constant terror crises, which makes us much closer to thinking about death at any moment through accidental means, accidental or violent means. Reality and competition television is huge. Definitely showing off who's the best, who's the winner. It's a very fire sign.
For that notoriety, like you said, for that fame.
For fame.
That fame, totally.
Yeah. We have our pop icons and the counterculture, which is emo and screamo. So we have this like, sparkly, colorful pop series with boy bands and pop princesses, and then you get the emo and screamo music right alongside it to show some of those darker sides. And that's the Pluto and Scorpio kids coming up and being like, no, we're going to do something different. Homes are transitioning from analog to digital products, including telephones, and there's a regular use of the internet being installed into homes at this point in the Western world. And then social networks, MySpace in 2003 and Facebook in 2004 with a social media takeover, and all of these articles about the death of the newspaper, the death of these institutions of media that have been in print or in works for maybe 100 years are starting to collapse within a decade because there's a whole new landscape of digital media. We have the iPod release in 2001 and the iPhone released in 2007, right at the end of Pluto and Sagittarius. Mm-hmm. And Generation Z is considered between 1997 and 2012, and Pluto and Sagittarius was 1995 to 2008. So all of these generations really cover pretty closely the generations.
Yeah.
So this is really what we call Gen Z. And then we have Viagra coming on the scene in 1998, which is gross.
So interesting.
Gross stamina.
And so when you talked about homes transitioning from analog to digital, you know what my mind instantly went to actually was caller ID. Yeah. And this, as we've moved through the generations throughout history like this, like when we were talking about like they finally sent a wireless telegraph message, and the whole point was connecting as many people as possible. For some of the first time, we had to start having boundaries with that. We had to start learning how to filter some of that, because that's how big the internet exploded. And I think that anyone that was a part of the creation of the internet deep down knew, even on a subconscious level, is going to be bigger than they'd ever be able to imagine. But there is no way in hell anyone would have been able to imagine how big, how far, how wide, and the fact that we would need to find so many protective measures as well. And I think that this makes a lot of sense that we learned a lot of this in the Pluto and Sagittarius generation, because just like you brought up with that mutability, you know, any of the mutable signs can be very, very boundless in a lot of ways and move in and around any obstacles in their path. And they can struggle with implementing and holding steadfast to boundaries sometimes. And I think that we saw a little bit of this during that generation, because this is the birth of social media during this age. This is when chat rooms and forums explode, and they birth basically MySpace.
We're talking to people across the world. Borderless.
Yes.
Expansion of territory.
Exactly. And here's a major theme with Sagittarius, everyone, is truth. And actually, this is a major theme with Scorpio as well, because manipulation and abuse of power. But in Sagittarius, truth is a major, major, major factor here. And we started seeing how we could play around with truth with the internet, right? And
I was just going to say, this was when Stephen Colbert coined truthiness over the war and terror, and how we said we were going to Iraq because of 9/11, but those were Afghanistan terrorists, not Iraq, and then the whole war on Iraq. And who are we believing? And yes, with social media came how to discern where to trust our resources.
Yes. How to trust, how to discern the information being presented to you, because we were given this ability to manipulate how others see us very easily through the means of social media. And we see this still obviously very prevalent today, but it's a much more common subject right now. You know, don't believe everything you see on social media. Normalize normal. Normalize the messy house, and you know, not having to look like you live in an influencer home and stuff. And it's so funny thinking about our relationship and the landscape of social media right now, and looking back on this time, because we were in those rudimentary stages. We're learning like basic coding, essentially.
Yeah, a lot of this is text based. Like a lot of people didn't have photo phones and data on their phones until the next generation.
Oh no, you had a digital camera. If you could get a digital camera, and there were tons of digital cameras on the market. And there were really inexpensive ones all the way up to super, super nice, sleek ones. And you would plug that into your computer, and you could manipulate and edit the photo in, usually I used like Paint and stuff. Most of us didn't use like Photoshop and stuff, because you either couldn't afford it or you wouldn't have known how to use it anyways. You would just use your computer's ability to like mess with the contrast and the warmth and the saturation and all of that. And this is where filters eventually came from, because we knew we were putting a filter because we knew all the right settings to put on there, again, with the purpose of changing the appearance a little bit, manipulating the truth a little bit.
Telling the story.
Telling the story. Exactly. And it makes so much sense in Sagittarius, because so much of it became, these are the earliest stages of people becoming what will eventually turn into content creators and these online entertainers, and the ability to make it online. You don't have to get to LA. You don't have to get to New York City necessarily. You don't have to be in one of these big metropolises where you're hopefully going to get scouted or someone's going to see you or pick up on you. You can upload pictures, words, videos to the internet. And this is when we start seeing self-made celebrities. And how Sagittarius is that? That's Sag going, you can, again, going around the boundaries. You can tell me all day long that this is the only way to get to what I want. But I know there's another way. And I'm the one who's ready and willing to take those risks, because that's Sag to me. Like, I'm willing to take the risks that most people before me haven't taken, and I'm going to try it. And so we also see during this stage the internet trends, like eating the Tide Pods, which will never, ever let poor Gen Z live down. They'll never live down the Tide Pods.
The children of Gen Z growing up and starting these trends. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and like the other fire sign Aries, it's a Wild West. It's a Wild West on a digital frontier. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a total Wild West on a digital frontier. And, the way we were raised, because we were witnessing the first chat rooms and the first forums, and we were there for MySpace to get invented. Like, there was all of this, fear around it. And it was taught that way. You be careful. People can lie in chat rooms and stuff. But by the time Gen Z is old enough to be utilizing the internet and social media, there is this comfort level and this familiarity that we didn't have yet. And exactly, it results in this digital Wild West of sorts. And oh my gosh, it's also why I do believe Gen Z has been able to be so groundbreaking and pioneer so many different movements for us, because they had that Sagittarian playground, and they weren't afraid to try things, and they weren't afraid to risk things. And it's easy for us who came before them to be like, well, I'm glad I never put that stage of my life on the internet for everyone to see. But if you've noticed, even if you would have cared about that, they don't necessarily care about that. They don't have the same. You can tell that a different set of parents raised this generation where they're not nearly as. We still had some of those tendrils and those ripples of, it matters what we look like. Our appearance really matters. What other people think about us really matters. And Gen Z really pioneered an entirely new form of individualism than we honestly had seen before, I personally think.
Yeah. There's definitely still a major discussion on the dangers of bullying and the mental health effects of trying to keep up with a certain level of beauty standard or lifestyle standard because of social media. So that's definitely something that kids are dealing with. But I agree, once you start facing some of these issues earlier on and your peers are all going through it at the same time, you learn different codes of conduct with each other and develop. I mean, how many different sets of rules do teenagers have than their parents have because they're living in a different generation? And it's like, well, no, this is the rule set that my generation is coming up with. So you can't prepare yourself for problems that you haven't faced before. So once these new kinds of issues come up, people adapt and they have new ways of tackling these issues too.
Absolutely. And you bring up a really, really good point, because Millennial and Gen Z, I feel pretty confident saying this. I would say Millennial and Gen Z, we are both responsible for the influencer culture and movement. Yeah. We created that together. I don't think it belongs to either one. I think it's a shared responsibility. And you're exactly right. We are seeing because that is so brand new, we're at the very, very beginning of being able to somewhat see both some of the positive and negative impacts of this massive culture that is influencer culture. It's huge. Even if you're not on social media at all, it has permeated itself into our society. There's stores and major brands and corporations that, because they can see the money and the business opportunities in influencer culture, that are part of it and fueling it and also feeding it. So even when you just go to your regular department store, big box store, grocery store, like, there are products on the shelves now that were made by influencers or are supposed to catch the eye of influencers. It's this and we're very, very early in all of this, because during this Pluto and Sagittarius, when social media was born, it really started out with just sharing your life as it was and sharing it with other people. And then, exactly like we talked about, as time went on, we needed the entertainment factor, right? We needed to tell the story, like you said. I loved how you said that. And I think that we saw that spin out into some really fascinating things. Number one, and you're very familiar with this, Jenny, the world of YouTube. YouTube is a special world, unlike any other social media platform. Yes. Totally different. And it still captures a lot of that rawness. YouTube is not nearly the curation that you'll see on Instagram, in my opinion, because they do have those really, really different vibes. But at the same time, like, this has given us this gift of learning from people we never would have got to. There's a reason it's called YouTube University. I mean, it is absolutely wild. These people with these incredible experiences and incredible educations showing up and sharing their information for free with you. And you can get on there and learn directly from these people. You know, there was a time where if you didn't live near that person, you never would have known they existed, honestly. And now we're seeing this. You have this opportunity to connect with this person, to have an exchange with this person. But one way that kind of the road forked there is you're seeing some people, and this is also very Sagittarian, putting themselves in the role of the sage, I think, and really trying to come off, right?
As the
experts. When we find out, right? We find out, especially through cancel culture, we have found out, like, all of these lies. Again, the theme of truth comes in. And cancel culture, would you say, Jenny, that cancel culture began at the end of Pluto and Sag, or would you say that is more of a Pluto and Capricorn, when cancel culture really
definitely Pluto and Capricorn?
That's what I thought too. Okay, that's what I think too. So
YouTube was born in 2005, so YouTube is a Pluto and Sagittarius baby. Because video and things like that really took a while for the phones to be. I mean, once it took off, it was everywhere. But it did take a while, probably closer to definitely the end of Pluto and Sagittarius, before people had media really and data on their phones.
And that's why, speaking of YouTube and speaking of the Wild West, early YouTube, talk about a Wild West. And like websites like 4chan and stuff, like some of these older websites during the Pluto and Sagittarius, again, totally ring true for this boundlessness and the incredible surge of information that came from that time. And also the spreading of incredibly dark, violent, or dangerous information as well was just as easily accessible.
The dark web.
Yes, exactly. And this is a perfect transition to introduce Pluto and Capricorn, I think, who is
definitely going to rein some things in.
Yeah, Pluto and Capricorn definitely is that transformation in the corporate world and in money and how we make our capitalist structures work here in the Western world. So that started in 2008 and went to, well, it's ongoing now until November of this year, back and forth a little bit. It started with the Occupy Wall Street movement. It really had that bang right at the start to show the archetype of Pluto and Capricorn was the financial crisis after that housing bubble burst, where all of these mortgages were rated under incredible ratings that they weren't supposed to be, and there was an enormous housing bubble, and it burst, and lots of banks went bankrupt, and then they were bailed out, and then the people started revolting. Not that it really went anywhere. The banks got bailed out. Some of the CEOs got fired, but they got fired with huge bonuses. But it was definitely this moment of people looking at, well, why do the people that have money have the money, and why can they play with our money the way that they are? And this theme continues on throughout Pluto in Capricorn. And this covers Generation Alpha, the end of Gen Z and the beginning of Generation Alpha, which has yet to have another generational name decided for it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's 2013 to 2025. So we're still in the babies of Gen Alpha being born, which I cannot wait to see how they turn out.
So fascinating. I agree.
Let's see. We also had privatization of federal programs and capitalism explosion. So you have these institutions. This happened in Great Britain as well as in the United States, where things that were typically covered by government federal regulations are starting to be sold to corporate venues, at least starting at contract level. But then some of the systems end up getting completely bought out by private companies, like the postal system, and there's a lot of war activity that goes out to private contracting war outside of the U.S. military. We have an increased division of classes since the economic boom of the 1980s. There's this slowly growing division of the rich and the poor. And this is where we get the conversations about the 1%ers and Bernie Sanders coming out to try and talk about the 99%ers and how we represent the people that are not putting their money and vested interests into votes in government positions. So again, Capricorn is all about these structures, these hierarchical structures that are built to protect the people as a safety measure. Really, Capricorn wants to protect just the way that Cancer wants to protect. It wants to protect its people. It wants to protect and be safe. But then you have the corruption, and Pluto is exposing the corruption, and it's showing the signs where things need to change, where the Capricorn energy is out of balance. So we also have the cryptocurrency start to begin, these anti-establishment measures that are like, well, if we're not going to change the financial systems as they are, we're going to completely change the financial systems altogether. And Capricorn being an earth sign, again, coming off of Taurus and Virgo, they're all about the material world, and the physical world, and money always is a big part of that. So we have our cryptocurrency story beginning in Pluto and Capricorn, which is completely transforming the game since we had our gold standard set in place.
Yeah.
And yes, influencer culture, I think, is really beginning in Pluto and Capricorn, because this is where you get the monetization of that Pluto and Sagittarius. We also have a lot of gender fluidity coming from the Pluto and Sagittarius generation that's growing up and exploring gender fluidity and the attempts to balance these gender roles as well. And again, Capricorn is a yin sign or a feminine sign, depending on how you like to talk about it. But it seems very masculine because we live in a patriarchy where these structures are working under a patriarchal and masculine, quote unquote, structure. So I love that this is in Capricorn because it's bringing back the understanding of, well, what is female? What is male? What are genders? What are the expectations? You know, it's questioning, it's Pluto breaking down these understandings of these roles that it is that we're supposed to be. And with that comes sex. Why does our sex life matter when we're talking about gender? How does self-expression always have to be tied to my genitalia? Or how do I get to be perceived as a sexual being and not have that be my identity kind of thing, or make it your identity? It's great if you wanted to have it that way too. And then, of course, we have the COVID-19 pandemic and the government put so much under the magnifying lens of every single person in their homes, waiting for more information, waiting for instruction, waiting for guidance, waiting for leadership, and seeing just how unprepared all of our structures and leaders were for something like this. And then this definitely gets into opinions, but whether you think of the quarantines or the vaccines as abuses of power or implications or implementations of power from a government level onto the people, and then the backlash of that from people who are questioning it. And there isn't this trust in the government that we have, or in our science institutions or any of our institutions that used to have some sort of moral backing. With Pluto and Capricorn, we're looking about how money has been corrupted to influence these institutions that are supposed to be helping the people and giving us a sense of safety and trust that we can trust our health and well-being into that. And with that, quarantine came a huge discussion about the balances of power, again, between men and women, because of how the family home was disrupted during this time with homeschooling and who was taking responsibility when everyone was stuck in the house. These questions continued to arise out of this as well. We also had our Me Too movement during Pluto and Capricorn, and I think this was sort of the beginning. The 2016 election and Brexit and a lot of things that came through that were breaking down systems and binds, and that started to bring about a lot of the quote unquote cancel culture where we're trying to hold people in power accountable.
This is, Capricorn, I have always said, being ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is like the ultimate, at least one of, data collectors of the zodiac, of the cosmos, because Capricorn, Saturn, those rings around Saturn, and being this planet very concerned with habits and patterns and how those will likely play out if continued at the same way, or reflecting back on past traditions and past patterns, and if things have been going this way and they look like this now, this is what, right? There's this very, very analytical approach that Saturn takes. And because of that, I think that when Pluto moved into Capricorn, there was this great movement of taking stock of where we've been and what's happened so far. Much bigger than had happened for many generations before. And when Pluto moved into Capricorn, it was like, hold on a second, hang on. And we saw these young Gen Zers growing up into teenagers and adults and asking a lot of questions, and millennials did as well. But I really attributed a lot to these Pluto and Sagittarius placements who grew up, and once Pluto was in Capricorn was like, hang on. Just because we've been doing it that way this whole time, why are we still doing it that way? Didn't you guys say, and this is where we see what I think of as how we've been seeing all these really old celebrity interviews resurfacing from the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and Gen Z calling a lot of it out and calling these older generations out and being like, this was not okay. And it was broadcast on TV and you all watched it and you all laughed and it was this normal total thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that by today, we know that this wasn't okay. And like, the thing that I think of, the example that comes to mind is, and this is unfortunately another, like we talked about in the golden age of Hollywood, this is an unfortunate dime a dozen story because this happens so heart crushingly frequent, but it was an old interview with Brooke Shields that resurfaced that was appalling to watch. If you don't know anything about Brooke Shields, and again, she is one of so many stories of her kind, of child into young adult actor, and who was put into harm's way repeatedly, groomed over and over and over again. And when asked in an interview by this male interviewer why she was okay filming I can't believe this, and this is I watched the interview, this is a very real thing, why she was okay with filming a nude sexual scene when she was 11 and why she's not okay doing that now at 15. And he's asking her this matter of fact, why? How come you don't want to anymore? And watching it again, watching that now and realizing that this was this public interview that millions of people watched, no one was batting an eye. And I think a lot of that, hold on, roll the tape back again. This is very Pluto and Capricorn to me. Like a lot of what Pluto and Capricorn's time resurfaced, there's been a lot that was like under the surface that we weren't seeing, but a lot of it is stuff that was right in front of our face the whole entire time. Yeah. And it's just putting it in our face with a very, very different, with a different attitude and tone altogether. And you're right, with Capricorn and its ruler Saturn being very right-brained, yin, feminine, but taking on this left-brained approach, this masculine and yang approach. I think it's why we start to see a lot of the breaking down of the gender roles during this time. If you can do that, I can do that too. Let's also talk about our differences. Let's talk about our similarities. Let's talk about our differences. This is going to be a time, while you were painting the picture of the landscape of Pluto and Capricorn, and I think about this all the time, but hearing all of those events like bulleted like that, I agree. It is going to be absolutely wild to see the later Plutonian effects from this particular time because of how brand new so much of it is. We don't even have very much throughout history to connect it to and draw examples and reference from. We are really in this, and this is so perfect for Pluto in Aquarius. But we are very much in this, like, we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see what happens. And I love looking through our list here, seeing Star Wars come up again and again.
I know. It's so true.
Throughout the generations. It's so true. It's important to look at the media and the stories being told during each of these generations, because exactly we're expressing our human experience.
Yeah, they're very reflective of the, art imitates life and life imitates art kind of thing. Yeah, it's fascinating. And yeah, who knows?
And we're really at that. I knew that this is where the episode would eventually go to, because we're at this like.
Well, and you just see how long it took for certain things to progress as we went through the zodiac. And then all of a sudden, every 15 years, is like a completely different landscape. It just shows you how much faster and faster time is moving and transformation is happening. And not to mention on a wider scale, because, you know, as of 3 generations ago, we have information from the entire world at our fingertips. Whereas, like we said, previous generations were only focused or understanding very much on their own town. And every once in a while, they'd get an understanding of what the president of the United States was saying or something like that.
Mhm.
But it just means everything's not just moving faster, but it's also so expanded. And it's no wonder everyone is very overwhelmed.
Yes.
And
Very,
learning
very
how
much.
to build structures that support us in a world of such overwhelm, I hope is something that we move towards, rather than just burning ourselves out into sparks of nothing.
Yeah, honestly, because this is the most people that have ever been on the earth ever before
Yeah.
right now.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of people who, you know, don't think about that or don't take that into consideration, but there are a lot of people that are, and there's a lot of people that are, and we're seeing this in how our death culture has also transformed over these last several generations. You know, we went from the late 1700s literally going broke for a funeral, right? Spending the entire estate on the memorial, basically, into death and death culture and the funeral industry becoming an industry in the first place, becoming this business professional landscape. Then in like from Pluto and Leo, Pluto and Virgo to Libra and Scorpio, we see the very traditional westernized funeral of you pick out a casket. Very often there's a viewing, right? Embalming has become this very common practice as this way of saying a final goodbye to the person as you once remembered them. That was the whole point of morticians and the way they preserved a body is to make it. This is one of the reasons that I love the show Haunting of Hill House, because there's so many fascinating big themes around death culture in there that we don't really look at. And I love that they have a funeral director and mortician character in there running a funeral home so that we really, really look and see, like, because it's usually so taboo. We're very like, we don't even want to talk about it. And it's not until Pluto in Sag was probably the earliest, but it really didn't fully take off until Pluto in Capricorn, again, with this analyzation of the data, that we started to see there are so many people in this world. If we keep burying them in boxes, we're polluting the earth, we're running out of space. There's all these issues with physically with the locale and geographic locations of cemeteries and things like that. People are having to, we can't look away anymore, and we have to look on and face death, and we have to look at, and I'm going to be really straight up and morbid here, we have to look straight up at decomposition here, the decaying of death and of a physical body. And this is something that for a long time in our death culture, we thought we could pause or postpone or kind of get around for a while. And one of the beautiful things that I love to see really birthing from the Pluto and Capricorn generation is this huge transformation in our approach to death, our approach to grieving, our approach to mental health. This is some of the most time throughout history that we're caring and talking about and educating about the health of the brain, which blows my mind that it took us this long in our human history. We've known for a long time how amazing our brains are. We've known that. That's been known for a very long time. But it took us really until now to start the conversation about mental health and what that is exactly. I think we saw
destigmatize it.
Yes, exactly. Because
instead of just sending people off to a home and
exactly. That's
waiting
all
for them to
mental
die.
health was. Lobotomies, institutions. The same idea was very similar to the way our culture responded to death, was like, close it up, lock it up. We don't want to see
Put them away.
Yes, exactly. Make it look like they're quote unquote normal. And I think that one of the biggest things we're seeing in Pluto, and this is perfect for Pluto and Capricorn, who's very tradition based. We're seeing the deconstruction of tradition itself.
Yeah.
And I think that there is like this undeniable quest for truth that we are seeing in this Pluto and Aquarius transition. Yeah. Totally. There won't be
and a denial
Aquarius,
of it.
Yes, and a denial, yes. But Aquarius is, I would probably say, of all of the signs, Aquarius might be the most forward moving. And I think we're going to see this energy of there's no going back once we're in Pluto and Aquarius.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's very, I think that, so as we transition into talking about Pluto and Aquarius.
For the second time.
For the second time, exactly. For the current new chapter of Pluto and Aquarius. In my own personal just like vibes and intuition, but also looking back through all of this data that you and I have talked about. I think that Pluto and Aquarius in a lot of ways is going to be a lot of full circle moments and a lot of accountability, inevitable accountability. A lot.
Rebellion, revolution, innovation for sure. AI has come onto the scene, and augmented reality has been around for a while, but it's getting to the point where it might start being used as an everyday tool. I don't know if I feel about that, but we're definitely seeing AI being used, and not just for fun. It's being used in all kinds of evaluation softwares and things like that, and it's very strange. It's a strange another new landscape. There, every day I'm reading about how humans' jobs are going to be taken away, but they say that with every single technological revolution. That it's just that work is going to transform. People have an innate desire to be useful to the societies that they're in, much as I never believed this talk that like people would just be lazy bums if they had the opportunity to.
I agree.
Maybe there's a small percentage of people that really just want to do nothing. But usually those are people that want that because they've been doing too much for their whole lives. They just want to break. But the nature of a human is to keep evolving and growing and creating and being of service and being in community. And if you give people the resources to be safe to do that, all kinds of innovation and creativity are possible. So like any tool, AI and the things that come out of that can be, and I'm sure we'll see both sides. We'll see it being used for wonderful things, and we'll see it being used for abuse of power as well. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. And I didn't mention in Pluto and Capricorn, but it's very significant. We had the Black Lives Matter movement in Pluto and Capricorn, and the Women's March kind of happened at within the same world. So we're still fighting for equal rights and equal understanding. And all I can see with this is, again, the people that are refusing to understand perspectives beyond their own. It's these blinders that are on about like what is humanity and how do we work together. And I'm hoping that Pluto and Aquarius brings more of that understanding of the similarities between all of us, and the compassion to know that we can all be on this journey together. I'm hoping.
I agree. I think that when Pluto's in the sign of Capricorn, we saw a lot of what people will do with financial motives.
Yeah.
And financial motives was very strong. And keep in mind, because Pluto and Capricorn began in 2008, and the economic landscape at that time that we talked about, we started off Pluto and Capricorn's generation in a lot of financial fear, in a lot of scarcity mindset. And we saw that play out in that shadow side of Capricorn that is greed. But greed is born, I firmly believe that greed is born from scarcity mindset, from fear.
Yeah.
I really do. I don't believe that greed is its own singular thing. I think it's a response to fear of scarcity, 100%.
Yeah.
And this is really what we saw, and why we saw this hyper professionalism, why we saw a spike in the corporate world like we had never really seen before. And I'm hoping that in Pluto and Aquarius, that we're not as motivated by money. And now, bear in mind, just like you talked about, Jenny, with the AI and the fears that it's going to take everybody's jobs. First of all, I could not agree more. You could look back at the start of the internet, at the start of the telephone. Every time you look back to a tech boom, the biggest collective fear is it's going to put people out of work. Now, what if, and this is a very Aquarian question in the first place, but what if, don't come for me, but what if that was okay? What if we didn't live in a world where it revolved around work and the job that you have to attain and hold forever and ever and ever? And what if we changed the way that we accrued and consumed resources, and it was different than the professional landscape that we've seen? Again, if you go back 100, 150 years, and we saw how much the family household changed, and that only 150 or so years ago, kind of the only reason for having a family was for this survival and to be able to live on this earth. And then there was progress from that, right? We see this liberation happen over time where the majority, not just a few, not just the elite, but even the 99 percenters, got to choose to get married because they wanted to, got to choose to or to not have children because they wanted to. This became a norm for everybody. That's possible when it comes to work. And even though we can't, I think a big reason why people are so afraid of even talking about that concept is because it's so ingrained that we can't imagine. If you've ever seen a person of a much older generation who has known literally nothing but work since the time they were 3 years old, and retirement almost destroyed them mentally because it took away this massive, massive part of the identity. But what if, because we are not making that such an intrinsic value and part of people's identities anymore, what could the landscape potentially look like if we didn't have to make that our top priority? And I agree with you that when it comes to AI, 100% we're going to see fraud like we've never seen before, period. Yeah. Let's call it what it is. We're going to 100% see fraud like we've never seen it before. It is terrifyingly scary, or terrifyingly accurate, the things people can manipulate and create and make it look like it was a real thing. Totally. But I think that just like Gen Z has already started to show us, and just like many open-minded people of any generation have shown us, I do think that humans at the end of the day are good. And I know that most of us, it's like hard for us to say that when we look around at the world. I know, but I really do believe that at the end of the day, the vast, vast majority of us are good in our hearts. And that given the power and the ability, we will use AI. Maybe it will be to eliminate some jobs, but maybe it's so that we don't have to work away our lives forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's long overdue. I mean, in the 1950s, they were coming up with all kinds of ways where we would only work 4 hours a week or something like that. It's long overdue. And that comes with a philosophical change too. And what our ideas around work will be. But, you know, even those of us that have survived the Pluto and Capricorn era, like so many of us in my generation and the generations after, like it used to be that you would work and pretty much no matter what kind of job you had, you'd be able to buy a property to live in. And now people are struggling to even have a place to live, whether it's renting or buying. And it's a lot of these really basic needs that came from this economic greed of Pluto and Capricorn that are going to have to find solutions in Pluto and Aquarius, because it's no longer going to look like you work a certain job for a certain number of years and then you can put a down payment on the house. Like that, like equation is just not going to be the same for the Pluto and Aquarius and beyond. There's going to have to be a different way of taking care of people and taking care of communities and making sure people's housing is the one that's up at the fore, but we're also going to be looking at water and food and clean air and making sure that our climate disasters are not taking out all communities of people. Like there is this like desperate collective need for us to find a very different equation for how we move through life.
And if it's one thing we have seen, not just in human nature, but evidenced in so many different micro ecosystems throughout our universe and our Earth, I do think things have to get worse before they'll get better. It's part of that Plutonian law. It's part of that tower moment.
Desperation breeds creativity.
Yes, it does. It does. It's one of those dualistic concepts. It sucks. And it's this beautiful resourcefulness that we clearly have within us. We have never adapted because things were great. We don't really adapt and forge new paths of progress unless we feel backed into a corner, typically. Those times of comfort, you know, we enjoy those, and I hope that those times of comfort like recharge our batteries. But where our grit comes in is when those times that we feel desperate, hopeless, trapped, and that fighter, like warrior, probably very Aries in a lot of ways, that cardinal fire energy. I will find a way out. I will move through this. I think that that's what breeds that. Pluto is in Aquarius, like we said, for once we get to the end of this year,
be 20 years.
20 years. Yes, to 2024. So
44.
Or yes, sorry, we're in 2024.
We are? Oh my God.
It's weird. It's even weird to say the year 2044. It's so weird. You know what? So I was watching in the background the other day. This is so funny. I was watching Yellow Submarine, the Beatles movie. And that movie came out in the 60s or 70s. And there's like a time machine aspect to the Yellow Submarine, to the plot of the movie. And it was funny because when the dial was like speeding forward and it was showing all of the year numbers, it technically stopped before it changed scenes at 2009. And so it looked like, oh, we're going so fast. Oh my God, now we're into the 2009. And then it cuts scene and it changes what they're talking about. But I was watching that and I'm like, gross. 2009 is 15 years ago.
I know.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
Weird.
But
Time is crazy.
Time is absolutely crazy. An Aquarius of any zodiacal archetype is definitely going to turn all of our philosophies right on their head, I think.
Yeah.
I really do. And I would say to kind of close out by giving everyone our insight, or if you want to call it advice, I guess, I really do believe that being as open-minded as possible is going to be one of the biggest strengths we can carry forward. Is that what would you say, Jenny, carrying forward into Pluto and Aquarius without stepping into this chapter with just a bunch of fear based on what we've experienced in Pluto and Capricorn?
Well, this morning I woke up with this very clear message. I had some kind of stomach bug yesterday, and I don't know about you, but every time I have this purging experience, I wake up afterwards, after I've recovered, with the most clarity.
Yes.
And this clear message came through for me today about like living life like game theory, in that like challenges give you XP points, and you can try over and over and over again, and you learn every time that you fail. So if anything feels like a challenge or a failure, like you're losing, instead change the mindset to one of like creative play, of like, how clever can I be here? How creative can I be here? How resourceful can I be here? And maybe that's glib to say when you're facing like really difficult challenges. So I'm not saying, if you're having a hard time, just think of it like a game. Like, you have to be in the right mindset to do it, but just invite that if things get challenging, being like, just what else is possible, I think is the question to have here. And Aquarius is awesome. Sure, there's like a lot of things to be like nervous about because the unknown is always scary. But we're here in a time of revolution because it's needed. And we've seen revolutions in the past, and they don't fix everything, but they move things forward, and you can be excited about what it is that we're moving forward to, and just get really clear about what kind of world you want to see, and then live your life as if everything that you're doing is in support of that. And that is difficult to do on a practical level. Like, you have to question sometimes what you're buying and what you're consuming, but also you are a person of this time. So you don't have to be too hard on yourself about participating in the things of this time. So be here in this time. Pluto will only be in Aquarius for 20 years. So enjoy the 20 years and absorb what Pluto in Aquarius has to offer you. And I hope you're able to figure out where that is in your chart.
Yes. And I love this because I really believe, and this was Pluto and Capricorn, it was building long before then, but we saw this spike in the trend of the self-care movement in Pluto and Capricorn. And I think the pendulum had to swing hard that way. If you go back to the Pluto and Cancer time that we talked about, which was, just for reference, years 1914 to 1938. This was the greatest generation. This time period also housed the silent generation. World War I, everything that led up to World War II took place during this time. There was a massive sacrifice everyone had to make for the greater good, for survival, for the home, if you will, for the home country, but also the individual home within your country. And by the time we got to its opposite, to Pluto in Capricorn, we saw the pendulum swing really, really hard into the self-care. Put your mask on first. Take care of yourself because you can't take care of anybody else. And I think that we saw this pendulum swing in an extreme in that way. And I personally believe that in Pluto and Aquarius is where we can find some moderation. We can find some middle ground, and we can feel filled up and stronger and more confident from that time, from that big focus on self, and come back to a more balanced human, being a decent human being mindset. That's Aquarius to me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of like, yes, the superhero, I want to try and save everybody. But the truth is, the simple way that Aquarius achieves that is by being decent to their fellow human, because you can and you should. And I hope that we see a lot of that, and it's conversations like these and continuing conversations like these beyond listening to episodes like this, and putting that into action and paying it forward in other little ways. It's okay if, you know, we're all, like Jenny just talked about, like economically speaking, paying it forward financially is physically not possible for a lot of people right now. But there are so many different ways we pay it forward and we come together. And I think we're going to see a lot of the blessings of this foundation we built in social media, and these connections we've formed, because I think that for the first time, we are going to see a very unique kind of coming together in community than we've ever seen before, for sure. And that's exciting to be a part of, even if it's going to be in the face of some scary or challenging stuff. That's powerful and beautiful, for sure.
Yeah, Aquarius loves to, whereas Leo feels better when the attention is on them, Aquarius, the opposite sign, feels really good when they can make other groups of people have a good time.
Yeah, and shine.
Yeah, and help everyone shine. Like Aquarius is the leader that's on the same level as everyone working for them. So it's this rising tide floats all boats is the beneficial way to look at it, I think.
This has been one of my favorite conversations I've ever had on this podcast. So fun. So fun. Before we go, anybody that would like to book a reading with you, Jenny, or work with you, will you please let us know where we can find you and follow you and support you?
Yeah, I'm JennySRP and JennySRP videos on Instagram. My website is JennySRP.com, and you can find my multimedia work and my Astro Tarot bookings on that same website. So that's where you can find me, and in that witch school, of course.
Yes, of course. That's an excellent place to work with and learn from Jenny in that witch school. But anybody that is looking to work with Pluto in their chart or their role in this upcoming chapter, yes, do not hesitate to reach out. All of Jenny's contact info is in the show notes below, of course. Thank you, my dear, for having this like hugely important conversation with me. It was so fun. So good.
So amazing. So many astrological goosebumps along the way.
Yes. Even just me as an individual, like I'm so glad I had this conversation with you, because I am going to take so much forward from this. Absolutely.
Me too. Transformative.
Yay. Yes. Everybody, thank you for your time today and every day throughout this Pluto Through the Generations series with Jenny and I. We are always so grateful for your time and your energy. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any other questions. If you have any other suggestions for the show, you can always reach me at thatwitchnextdoor.com/conjurethatwitch. Make sure now more than ever that you are out there staying safe. You keep on laughing, and make sure you stay magical out there, my friends.
What is that witch school? Well, it's kind of my twist on Patreon. See, for as little as $5 a month, you can get instant access to our entire back catalog of incredible bonus content, like bonus episodes, witchy lessons, a ton of astrology resources, guest teachings, and so much more. But I didn't want to just keep the magic going in between episodes with bonus content. I wanted to keep the learning going, and I wanted to keep the community going. So I also offered tiers that opened up opportunity for continued intentional, magical academic learning, as well as opportunity for creating community with like-minded witchy individuals. For just $30 a month, you can get full, complete access to everything inside that witch school, including our exclusive members-only social media platform on Mighty Networks, where right now, witches and energy practitioners and students just like you are all learning, working together, sharing together, and supporting each other week in and week out. We talk about the show, we share dreams that we've had, we share each other's tarot readings, and ultimately, we support each other as magical beings in a very anti-magical world. You can join us today at thatwitchnextdoor.com/enroll to learn more and start your enrollment today.